Well, hello, Nativity Bible Heads. It is Dr. Wayne, and this is your Bible Study Wednesday. I hope everybody's doing all right today. You know, we're still trekking through 1 Kings, and last week in 1 Kings chapter 8, Solomon dedicated or inaugurated the temple that was built back in chapters 6 and 7. And in chapter 9, which is where we are today, we're going to cover chapters 9 and 10. We have a response. In Solomon's dedication, in his inauguration, if you will, of the temple, there are a lot of requests that are made and of God. And in chapter 9, we get God's response. God is going to respond to all of that stuff. And in typical Deuteronomistic parlance, that's the narrative flow, if you will, of 1 Kings, the theological flow. There's a promise from God and a threat. Chapter 9, 1 Kings chapter 9. When Solomon had finished building the house of the Lord and the king's house, and all that Solomon desired to build, the king's house, that's the palace where Solomon lived. That was narrated in chapter 7 as well. Verse 2, the Lord appeared to Solomon a second time, as he had appeared to him at Gibeon. Now, if you recall, maybe we don't, I know I didn't specifically until I had to look it up, but back in 1 Kings chapter 3, that was when Solomon had an appearance from the Lord. He had a dream. The Lord spoke to him about... he's kind of like, that incident was God coming to Solomon saying, kind of like that genie that comes out of the lamp that says, oh, I'll give you 3 wishes. Well, he didn't give Solomon 3 wishes. He just said, ask what I should give you. That's all he said. That's all God said to Solomon back in chapter 3. And remember what Solomon asked for? He asked for wisdom. And he got it. And because he didn't ask for riches, he got riches also. That's what we were told back in chapter 3. So that's what it's referring to here in chapter 9, verse 2, where it says that the Lord appeared to Solomon a second time, as he had appeared to him at Gibeon. Verse 3, the Lord said to him, I have heard your prayer. The prayer he's talking about is the dedication prayer of the temple inauguration. And your plea, which you made before me. I have consecrated this house that you have built and put my name there forever. Very important that we see that it's the name. Notice it's not a building for the Lord. It's a building for the presence, the way we can interact with God, but it's not the actual place where God lives. My name, my eyes and my heart will be there for all time, which is to say, he will look upon it and love it. Okay, that's the way that's being said. Now, but that doesn't mean it's necessarily going to never. It's always going to be there. Okay, verse 4. As for you, if you will walk before me as David, your father, walked, with integrity of heart and uprightness. And you might wonder when you hear that statement about with integrity of heart and uprightness, like, oh, wait a second. Okay, we're glossing over a lot of David if we're just saying that he was always, upright and had integrity of heart. Anyway, and doing according to all that I have commanded you, and keeping my statutes and my ordinances. This is all what we call Deuteronomistic language, the language that we inherit from Deuteronomy, about basically saying, if you walk straight, everything's going to be fine. All right? Verse 5, then I will establish your royal throne over Israel forever, as I promised your father David, saying, there shall not fail you a successor on the throne of Israel. That's the promise. Now the threat, or carrot and stick, if you want to think of it that way. Verse 6, if you turn aside from me, you or your children, and do not keep my commandments and my statutes that I have set before you, but go and serve other gods and worship them, then I will cut Israel off from the land that I have given them, and the house that I have consecrated for my name I will cast out of my sight, and Israel will become a proverb and a taunt among all peoples. This house will become a heap of ruins. Everyone passing by it will be astonished and will hiss, and they will say, why has the Lord done such a thing to this land and to this house? Then they will say, because they have forsaken the Lord their God, who brought their ancestors out of the land of Egypt and embraced other gods, worshiping them and serving them. Therefore, the Lord has brought this disaster upon them. Thus, that's the threat. This is, like I said, Deuteronomistic language. There's always, notice how God is talking here, and there's no response, okay? We're going to, when we look at verse 10 and then we go on, it's like there's no response by David, by Solomon. This is like the final word of promise has a threat. Remember, all of this was written during the exile. The people, the intended readers of this narrative had lost the temple. The temple was in ruins. They were people in a foreign land now, and others were talking about them, saying, oh, isn't that horrible what happened to these people? Because their Lord, their God, had taken them out of Israel, and then they went and they worshiped other gods, and now all this disaster came upon them. That's why they're here. This is what their experience was in the exile of Babylon. Okay, always got to remember, the intended audience, the intended readers of a narrative give us they give us a clue as to how we should understand what it is we're saying. Oh, they give us a clue as to how we can understand what the Bible is saying. All right, so verses 10 and following, we're going to go all the way through chapter 10, but chapter 9, verse 10 through chapter 10 is all going to be a revisit of the narrator giving us little snippets of examples of how wealthy Solomon was, how immaculate all of his success was, all of his riches, all of his wisdom, and the impact that this wisdom had on all the world, and all of this is what we are going to get a flavor of again. All right, here we go. Chapter 9, verses 10 and following. At the end of 20 years, Solomon, remember, he was a very young man when I say young man, he was a boy, okay? He was a kid, all right, when he started his reign. So it was a long reign. So we're talking about like in the middle of his reign here. At the end of 20 years, in which Solomon had built the two houses, that's the temple and his palace, the temple of the Lord and the house of the Lord and the king's house, King Hiram of Tyre, having supplied Solomon with cedar and cypress timber and gold. Remember, that's where he got the stuff to build those things. As much as he desired, King Solomon gave to Hiram 20 cities in the land of Galilee. Galilee, interesting. Oh, that's where Jesus was from eventually, right? But when Hiram came from Tyre to see the cities that Solomon had given him, they did not please him. Therefore he said, "What kind of cities are these that you have given me, my brother?" So they are called the land of Kabul to this day. The word Kabul means land good for nothing. Yeah, land, good for nothing land. Remember, so this is that area where Jesus was from, right? Do you remember that incident in the Gospel of John where Philip and Nathaniel, Philip introduces Nathaniel to Jesus, and Nathaniel's response was, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Nazareth is in that region there in Galilee. It very likely had this this idea that, that's where those worthless cities are that got given to Hiram. Very likely that's part of the background of Nathaniel's comment of, "Can anything good come out of Nazareth?" Because good for nothing, the land of Kabul, a land good for nothing. That's the reason why. Okay, verse 14. But Hiram had sent to the king 120 talents of gold. So this little incident that it's trying to demonstrate. So our narrator is painting it in such a way that has us say, "Wow, Solomon really did a good job here of making sure that he didn't actually give Hiram anything. Wasn't he wise?" Okay. Remember, wisdom in the Bible isn't always moral or even advantageous in an ethical sense. A lot of times wisdom is simply cunning, okay? Or, if you will, being shrewd. This is equivalent to wisdom a lot of the times. And this shrewdness is the way our narrator is casting this thing that Solomon did with Hiram of Tyre. Now, in reality, if you think about it, usually when you're giving up cities to another king, that usually means you're paying some sort of tribute. What was, in reality, probably what was going on here was that Hiram was actually pretty powerful. And in order to keep him at bay, Solomon had to give up some land to him. And our narrator casts it as though Solomon's being, wise by paying him back with cities that are nothing. Very likely that is what is going on. Verse 15 is going to talk more about, and following is going to talk about more about how Solomon, he makes these great decisions. This is the account of the forced labor that King Solomon conscripted to build the house of the Lord and his own house, the Millo and the wall of Jerusalem. Okay, now, forced labor. One of the things we need to understand about forced labor, there is no moral judgment one way or the other about forced labor. It's just simply a fact of what happened. We're going to get down to who was in the forced labor, but right now we're supposed to get all of the stuff that he built. We're supposed to be impressed with that. Our moralistic judgments about what we think about forced labor, that really doesn't aid our getting what the narrator's point is, okay? He used forced labor to build the house. The Lord in his own house. The millow, what's the millow? The millow, you know how when you build stuff in a hilly area, you have to terrace the land, and the millow are the filled in, those places that you have to terrace off and fill in, terrace it and fill it, till it, terrace it and fill it, to build up to help retain the walls of the city. That's what you have to do when you don't have a flat surface. That's what the millow is. And the wall of Jerusalem. And now we're going to list some cities here. Hazor, Megiddo, Gezer. And parenthetically in verse 16, Pharaoh, king of Egypt, had gone up and captured Gezer and burned it down and killed the Canaanites who lived in the city and had given it as a dowry to his daughter, Solomon's wife. So Solomon rebuilt Gezer. Lower Beth Horon, Baalath, Tamar in the wilderness within the land, as well as all of Solomon's storage cities, the cities for his chariots, the cities for his cavalry, and whatever Solomon desired to build in Jerusalem, in Lebanon, and in all the land of his dominion. It's a lot of building. That's one of the things that Solomon was known for. Again, we're supposed to be impressed by all of this. Verse 20, all the people who were left of the Amorites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites, who were not of the people of Israel. Remember, this is that traditional list of peoples that were previous inhabitants of the land that of promise that they took. All of the who were not, and the Jebusites, who were not the people of God, their descendants who were still left in the land, whom the Israelites were unable to destroy completely, these Solomon conscripted for slave labor, and so they are to this day. Okay, our narrator, again, we're supposed to be impressed with, oh, isn't that cool? He didn't actually, yes, he did all this with forced labor, and then the forced labor was not with the Israelites, it was with these peoples that were the people that they had not obliterated in coming in. We're supposed to be impressed by this. And now, like again, our 21st century moral judgments aside, we have to lay those aside in order for us to get the narrator's point here. Because remember, anytime we're reading a biblical narrative, we got to get inside the narrative mindset. But, verse 22, but of the Israelites, Solomon made no slaves. They were the soldiers. They were his officials, his commanders, his captains, and the commanders of his chariotry and cavalry. So, aren't we impressed with all of that? Verse 23, these were the chief officers who were over Solomon's work, 550 who had charge of the people who carried on the work. So here's the thing, and Solomon, he was a great administrator too. Verse 24, but Pharaoh's daughter went up from the city of David to her own house that Solomon had built for her. Then he built the millow. Again, that was mentioned earlier about how this daughter of Solomon, this daughter of the Pharaoh was given as a gift to Solomon. And we're just supposed to again say, oh, wow, what a powerful man. Verse 25. 3 times a year, Solomon used to offer up burnt offerings and sacrifices of well-being on the altar that he built for the Lord, offering incense before the Lord. So he completed the house. And that's just a little tidbit thing. Remember, whenever we're reading scripture, there's, it's like it's a soup. Scripture is like a soup, a stew that you throw all the bits in, and you, even the bad stuff that's not you got some good stuff, you got and you got some bad stuff, and it's not the best, but it's just like, it's stew, and then you boil it together and it's all one thing. That's what we get with scripture. It's all one stew, but these are little tidbits of things like, well, we can't throw that away. We got to put it in there. So here we go. Verse 26. King Solomon built a fleet of ships at Etzion Geber, which is near Eloth, on the shore of the Red Sea, in the land of Edom. That's down at the southern tip there between Sinai and Israel. Hiram sent his servants with the fleet, sailors who were familiar with the sea, together with the servants of Solomon. So Hiram, remember, he's the guy that they sold the little worthless cities to. He always had some sort of, a lot of commercial dealings with Solomon. Sailors who were familiar with the sea. Israel didn't have sailors. They didn't have a navy. That wasn't their thing, okay? So that's the reason why when King Solomon builds the fleet of ships, he didn't have people to man it because they didn't know how to do that. That wasn't their thing. So he had to get people from Hiram again. And verse 28, they went to Ophir and imported from there 420 talents of gold, which they delivered to King Solomon. Ophir is probably like northern Africa or something. But again, all of this is intended to just have us say ooh and ah about Solomon. Okay, chapter 10 is going to continue this thing with a very familiar little snippet. When the Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon, so now the emphasis is like, oh, he did all this wonderful stuff, and his fame was so widespread that people started to hear of it from far away. Where is Sheba? Sheba is it's on the Arabian Peninsula, probably like a place like Yemen is probably a good guess. When the Queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon, fame due to the name of the Lord, see, our narrator is like, yeah, Solomon's good. She came to test him with hard questions, which is to say that you don't come to somebody with hard questions unless you are impressed with them. She came to Jerusalem with a very great retinue, with camels bearing spices and very much gold and precious stones. And when she came to Solomon, she told him all that was on her mind. Solomon answered all her questions. There was nothing hidden from the king that he could not explain to her. When the Queen of Sheba had observed all the wisdom of Solomon, the house that he had built, the food of his table, the seating of his officials, and the attendance of his servants, their clothing, his valets, and his burnt offerings that he offered at the house of the Lord, there was no more spirit in her. What is that trying to say? It's like, oh, it just took a breath away. It's like, oh. Yeah, it's basically saying how impressed she was with him. There was no more spirit in her. It's like she was breathless. Speechless, breathless. That's the way we respond because it's so wonderful. Verse 6, so she said to the king, the report was true that I heard in my own land of your accomplishments and of your wisdom. But I did not believe the reports until I came and my own eyes had seen it. Not even half had been told me. So it's like, those words I heard about you, not only are they true, but they just don't even begin to encompass how wonderful you are. Your wisdom and prosperity far surpass the report I had heard. Happy are your wives. That's a blessing. Happy are your wives. Blessed be your wives. Blessed be your concubine. Blessed be your women. Happy are these your servants who continually attend you and hear your wisdom. Blessed be the Lord your God. Notice he's actually invoking the name of Solomon's God, who has delighted in you and set you on the throne of Israel. Because the Lord loved Israel forever, he has made you king to execute justice and righteousness. These words are clearly the narrator putting that into her mouth. I mean, all of the work the narrator has done to get us to be impressed with Solomon, now we want to know. Now the narrator is impressing us with how other people were impressed. Verse 10. Then she gave the king 120 talents of gold, a great quantity of spices and precious stones. Never again did spices come in such quantity as that which the Queen of Sheba gave to King Solomon. How else you get, when you're going for superlatives, you gotta sometimes just really reach and say, oh, you know what, however much he'd ever gotten before, he never got that much again. I mean, that's how much it was. A profundity. Moreover, the fleet of Hiram, which carried gold from Ophir, brought from Ophir a great quantity of almug wood and precious stones. Here we're supposed to be impressed with, wow, what's almug wood? So it's like, the idea is like, even that rare stuff. Verse 12. From the almug wood, the king made supports for the house of the Lord and for the king's house, lyres also, and harps for the singers. No such almug wood has come or been seen to this day. Impressive, right? Verse 13. Meanwhile, King Solomon gave to the Queen of Sheba every desire that she expressed, as well as what he gave her out of Solomon's royal bounty. Then she returned to her own land with her servants. This is one of those things. This is one of the reasons why people think that there was some sort of a sexual relationship between them. We don't know that that's necessarily the case. Our narrator, you would think that if our narrator thought that had happened, that he wouldn't hide any words. But we don't even have a euphemistic expression where it says, you know, that meanwhile King Solomon gave to the Queen of Sheba every desire that she expressed. I don't think he's saying nudge, nudge, wink, wink. It sounds to me, as well as he gave her out of Solomon's royal bounty. I don't know. I don't know how. I don't know if that's a nudge, nudge, wink, wink. You know, the idea of like, is he being euphemistic here? We don't really know. So anything like that would be speculation. Although there is a tradition that there was some intercourse and that there was progeny, and that's the reason why the people of, I think it's Ethiopia, had this tradition that their emperors were descendants of a union between the two. That's a tradition. We don't have any evidence for it. Okay. Let's finish this up. Not very many verses left. Verses 14 and following. The weight of gold that came to Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold. That's an interesting word, 666, huh? Besides that which came from the traders and from the business of the merchants and from all the kings of Arabia and the governors of the land. Again, we're just more stuff for us to be impressed with. King Solomon made 200 large shields of beaten gold. 600 shekels of gold went into each large shield. Verse 17, he made 300 shields of beaten gold. 3 minas of gold went into each shield, and the king put them on the house of the forest of Lebanon. That was a big part of the palace that he lived in. Just an opulent building. The king also made, listen to this, also made a great ivory throne and overlaid it with the finest gold. The throne had 6 steps. The top of the throne was rounded in the back, and on each side of the seat were armrests with 2 lions standing beside the armrests, while 12 lions were standing, 1 on each end of a step on the 6 steps. Nothing like it was ever made in any kingdom. This is hyperbole, exaggeration. We actually do see other thrones. Archaeologists have unearthed other thrones that kings in that area would fashion for themselves. So it's really not that unique. Verse 21. All King Solomon's drinking vessels were of gold, And all the vessels of the house of the forest of Lebanon were of pure gold. The house of Lebanon, that's the main hall in the palace complex. None were of silver. It was not considered as anything. It was not considered as anything in the days of Solomon. So it's like, oh, silver, yeah, you think silver's awesome? Well, guess what? Solomon never needed silver. That's how much gold he had. For the king had a fleet of ships of Tarshish at sea with the fleet of Hiram. Once every 3 years, the fleet of ships of Tarshish used to come, bringing gold, silver, ivory, apes, and peacocks. Did you see that? Or maybe baboons, we're not really sure. But the idea here is that these ships brought really exotic animals. Again, we're supposed to be impressed. All right. Thus, King Solomon excelled all the kings of the earth in riches and in wisdom. The whole earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put into his mind. Every one of them brought a present, objects of silver and gold, garments, weaponry, spices, horses, and mules, so much year by year. So the bringing of gifts. Remember when we have the wise men, the Magi, coming to Jesus and Mary and bringing their gifts? That's what you do when you are giving gifts to a king. The gifts that Jesus, that were brought to the baby Jesus, were emblematic of their recognition that this is the king that they're giving it to. This is, so when King Solomon receives this, it's in that vein, right? That's what you bring to a king. When we talk about the gifts of the Magi to the baby Jesus, the answer to the question, what's the symbolism of the gold, the frankincense, and the myrrh? Frankincense and myrrh, the spices and the balm and oils. It's like, that's what you bring to a king. That's the kind of thing that kings get. If you're going to go see a king, you bring stuff like that. It doesn't have to be any more. Symbolic than that. All right, verses 26 and following, 26 to 29, our last few verses. Solomon gathered together chariots and horses. He had 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horses, which he stationed in the chariot cities and with the king in Jerusalem. So basically he's saying that the horses and the stables, they were, not only were they all over the land, they were also there in Jerusalem. Those are very, what's the word? It's an iconic thing, the stables. Yeah, I don't know the word I was looking for there. The stables are representative also of, wow, we're supposed to really be impressed with all of this. The king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stones. Remember the thing about silver? It's like, yeah, that's silver, that's all. It's like, oh, everybody's rich now. And he made cedars as numerous as the sycamores of the Shephelah. Solomon's import of horses was from Egypt and Kuwait. Kuwait is probably also in Africa, or Cilicia, in southern Asia Minor. Not Africa, but South Asia Minor, like South Turkey-ish. And the king's traders received them from Kuwait at a price. A chariot could be imported from Egypt for 600 shekels of silver, and a horse for 150. So through the king's traders, they were exported to all the kings of the Hittites and the kings of Aram. Solomon had a lot going on, and we are supposed to, this is like the height of our being impressed, because things are not going to stay at this level. It's going to go downward. But our narrator has got to puff up as much and talk as glowingly as they possibly can before the other side comes. Because remember that little carrot and stick, the promise and the threat from God. Well, here he is receiving the promise. Remember when he was asked, ask of me anything, God said to Solomon. And he asked for wisdom. And we were told that, oh, since you didn't ask for riches and you asked for wisdom, good boy, I'm going to give you wisdom. But I'm going to give you riches as well. And so this is all our narrator's attempt to help us see how God fulfilled on this promise. Not that Solomon was special, it's just that the Lord was faithful. So it's all about the Lord being faithful, the Lord doing it. This is the message of grace. This is the message of the New Testament, basically, is that there's nothing that we do to deserve anything good that God gives us. It's all a gift. So there you have it. That's our lesson for today. So join me again next week. I think we're going to be just doing chapter 11. But there's going to be trouble coming up very soon. Bye-bye.